The fluorescent lights in our office always flickered around 4:45 p.m., like they were protesting the start of another late night. Usually, I stayed until 8 or 9, long after everyone else had gone home, tying up loose ends no one else wanted to handle. But on that Thursday evening, something inside me snapped in a way I didn't fully understand yet. My name is Mandy Fletcher. I'm 42 years old, and until that night, I'd been convinced that loyalty and hard work guaranteed stability. Turns out, loyalty in corporate life only matters when it benefits someone else. The moment that changed everything happened at 4:52 p.m. I was sitting across from my boss, Grant Saunders, who was scrolling through emails on his phone while I finished presenting the quarterly improvements I'd personally spearheaded. 28% faster turnarounds, 40% fewer client complaints, and a new onboarding system that had saved the company more than $200,000 this year alone. I'd spent the last 2 months preparing that report. Data, projections, case studies, everything. When I finally stopped talking, Grant looked up at me with the kind of expression people give toddlers who proudly show off a scribble. "A promotion?" he repeated, leaning back in his chair. "Mandy, maybe in a few years. You're reliable, but leadership requires presence. Big picture thinking. Reliable presence. Big picture. Corporate language for you do all the work, but you'll never get the title." He actually chuckled, and said, "But hey, keep grinding and we'll see." I thanked him, because that's what people like me are conditioned to do, and I walked out with my heart pounding and the edges of my vision buzzing. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. What I felt was hollow, but the real turning point came the moment I returned to my desk. It was 4:59 p.m., and for the first time in years, I stared at the clock like it was some forbidden object. 5 o'clock was something other people celebrated. Parents who left to pick up kids. Coworkers who had hobbies, gym classes, friends, people who had boundaries, people who weren't me. Then something strange happened. I closed my laptop. I grabbed my coat. And I walked out. My coworkers looked at me like I'd grown wings. One even whispered, "Is she sick?" But I said nothing. I just kept walking. And as I stepped outside, the cold January air hit my face, and God help me, I felt free. Not empowered, not confident, not rebellious. Just free like I'd stepped off a treadmill that had been speeding up for 8 straight years. I made it home by 5:40 p.m., and my husband, Chris, nearly dropped the spoon he was holding. "You're home early," he said, blinking. "Yeah," I said, hanging up my coat. "I decided to leave on time today." His expression softened in a way I didn't expect. "I like this version of you." It stung in the way truth usually does. For years, I'd been the dependable one, the first to volunteer, the one who solved problems quietly, the one who carried the weight of 3 roles without complaining. Grant used to joke that I kept the department running. I always laughed along, not realizing he meant it literally. But that night, as Chris and I cooked dinner together, something we hadn't done in months, I realized how much of my life I'd traded for stability that wasn't even real. I slept well for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I still arrived early, but not early enough to clean up everyone else's chaos before the day started. At 8:58, I walked into the bullpen with a coffee and my hair still damp from the shower. People actually stared. "Mandy, did you get stuck in traffic?" someone joked. "No," I smiled. I got stuck respecting my time. They laughed, unsure how to interpret that. By 10 a.m., small cracks began to appear. A vendor had changed their invoicing process overnight, a problem I usually handled quietly before anyone even noticed. This time, when the panicked email chain started circulating, I didn't swoop in. I just watched. At noon, a client complaint escalated because the support team didn't know the correct workaround in the system. Another thing I usually handled. And by 3 p.m., our biggest client, Atlas Dynamics, sent a furious message that they'd been waiting 4 days for a contract revision that Grant had forgotten about. You know who always reminded him? Me. But I didn't this time. Because according to him, I wasn't ready for leadership. That was Thursday. By Friday afternoon, the stress in the office was visible. People rushing, phones ringing, Slack messages firing like arrows in every direction I left at 5 p.m. again. And that was when the universe finally decided to reveal its hand. 2 days later, Sunday morning, I woke up to 38 missed calls, most from Grant. Some from corporate. 3 from the CEO, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. I stared at my phone, heart pounding, knowing without a doubt. This wasn't about a lost file or a delayed email. Something much bigger had broken. And I wasn't sure if I was the cause or the solution. But I knew one thing. They had finally realized what happened when I stopped doing all the invisible work they never once appreciated. When I finally sat up in bed that Sunday morning, the first thing I felt wasn't fear. It was disbelief. 38 missed calls? I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I'd somehow pocket-dialed my way into a crisis. But no. Every call was real. Every voicemail was real. And every message had the same nervous, frantic tone. Mandy, call me. ASAP. The last voicemail was from Grant. His voice shook. Mandy, we need you. Please call me back. As soon as you get this. I stared at the phone for a long moment. For years, I'd jumped the second my phone buzzed. Nights, weekends, even during anniversaries and birthdays. For years, I'd been told that I was so reliable that they could always count on me. And now, after 1 week of not overworking myself, they were in full meltdown. I set the phone down without calling back. Instead, I walked into the kitchen where Chris was pouring coffee. "You're quiet," he said, glancing at me. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. "Work called. A lot." He raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. They've finally noticed you're not running the entire department by yourself anymore?" I exhaled slowly. It looks like it. He placed a mug in front of me and sat down. "You don't owe them your Sunday." And he was right. For the first time, I actually believed it. Still, 38 missed calls. Something serious had happened. Around 10 a.m., my friend and coworker, Lila, sent a text. "Lila, call me, I'm begging you. Something exploded on Friday." I sighed, grabbed my phone, and called her. She picked up instantly. "Finally, Mandy, what the hell is going on? Everything fell apart after you left." I stayed quiet. "What do you mean?" "You know that contract revision for Atlas Dynamics? The one Grant forgot to finalize? Well, they pulled the plug on the entire renewal." My chest tightened. "They canceled the renewal? That contract is worth $3 million per year." "Exactly. And because the renewal wasn't processed correctly, Atlas thinks we intentionally stalled to renegotiate at a higher cost. They emailed the CEO directly, accusing us of incompetence." I swallowed. Hard. "And it gets worse," she continued. "Finance realized late Friday that the vendor invoices from January weren't processed because the new system update overwrote your workflow notes. Nobody knew the workaround." "Because I was the one who always handled it," I whispered. "Yes, and then, oh God. Legal found out that the compliance documents you usually prepare weren't submitted on time. They thought you were still doing them. But compliance isn't even in my job description." "I know, but everyone assumed you'd handle it." The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. "Mandy," she said softly, "people are panicking. Corporate is flying in tomorrow." That explained the unknown number. "They're calling an emergency meeting at 8 a.m. Monday," she added. "They want you there. Grant practically had a breakdown." I closed my eyes. "Lila, I didn't cause this." "I know you didn't. They caused it by piling everything on you and pretending it was normal." I thanked her, hung up, and sat alone in the kitchen. For years, I'd been the invisible safety net the entire company quietly depended on. But the moment I stepped back, even just a little, everything collapsed. And the sickest part? My job description didn't cover half of what I'd been doing. That night, I lay awake thinking about Monday. I wasn't afraid of being fired. If anything, that would have felt like a relief. What scared me was something deeper. What if they tried to drag me back into the same cycle? Because I knew how people like Grant operated. They didn't apologize. They panicked, begged, manipulated, and then, once the crisis passed, pretended nothing had happened. I wasn't going back to that. Not anymore. When I walked into the office Monday at 7:58 a.m., all eyes turned to me like I was a ghost returning from the dead. People actually whispered Grant stood outside conference room C, pale and sweating. The moment he saw me, he rushed over. Mandy, thank God. We need to talk. I held up a hand. The meeting starts at 8. We'll talk then. His mouth opened, then closed again. He followed me like a lost dog. Inside the conference room were the CEO, Marianne Ford, the regional director, 2 corporate auditors, legal counsel, and 3 department heads who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. Documents were spread across the table. Thick stacks. Chaos printed on paper. When the clock hit 8 o'clock, Marianne cleared her throat. Mandy, please sit. We have several issues to discuss. Grant swallowed loudly, his voice barely a whisper. She's the only one who can fix this. He wasn't wrong, but not for the reasons he thought, because fixing the system wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that they never built one without me. And now, they were finally forced to face what happened when a company leans too heavily on a single, unrecognized backbone. As I sat down and folded my hands, I realized this was no longer their emergency. It was my moment. The moment everything shifted. The conference room felt colder than the rest of the office, like the air conditioning had been cranked up just for this emergency. Everyone looked tense, wide eyes, stiff shoulders, tapping pens. I'd been in plenty of high-pressure meetings, but never one where every single person seemed terrified of me walking out. I took my seat slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. The CEO, Marianne Ford, didn't waste time. Mandy, she began, folding her hands, we're in a serious situation. Several critical failures occurred last week. We need to understand what happened. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was careful, almost diplomatic. That alone told me how bad things were. I nodded. I'm listening. Before Marianne could continue, Grant blurted out, It all fell apart because Mandy wasn't here. She handles these things. I turned my head sharply, giving him a look that shut him up instantly. Marianne's eyes flicked to him, unimpressed. Grant, we will get to you. For now, Mandy, could you walk us through your typical responsibilities? There it was. The question I had waited 8 years to hear. I opened the binder I'd brought with me. A binder I didn't need, but one that made a point. Inside were printed pages of my job description, with the company logo stamped on each page. This, I said, sliding the first page onto the table, is what I'm officially responsible for. Everyone leaned in, a few brows lifted. And what I actually do? I continued. Well, that's different. The room grew still. I began listing everything I'd handled over the years. By the time I finished, the regional director was staring like he'd just witnessed a ghost. You did all that? He asked quietly. I nodded. And how much of that, Marianne asked carefully, is part of your job description? Very little, I replied. A hush fell around the room. Even the auditors paused their note-taking. I continued. For years, I took on more and more because nobody else knew how to do these tasks. And instead of fixing the gaps, management relied on me to plug them. Marianne shot a sharp look at Grant. He shifted uncomfortably. Mandy's always been reliable. That's not a compliment, Grant, I said softly. It's a warning sign. One of the auditors cleared his throat. Can you explain last week's failures from your perspective? Sure, I said. Let's start with Atlas. I explained, clearly methodically, how the contract revision had been left forgotten because Grant never followed through. Then I detailed how the vendor invoicing error happened because the system update wiped my notes. And since no one else had ever learned the process, everything stalled. Then the compliance failure, because the documents had been handed to me unofficially, despite not being in my scope. And finally, the escalation breakdown, because the department's roles were a mess and I'd been the patchwork solution for years. Every point was factual. Calm, professional. But the consequences were devastating. Marianne leaned back, processing everything. So the root issue is not Mandy's absence. The issue is that our systems rely too heavily on one person. And that person isn't me, I said. It's whoever is willing to take on unpaid labor. Silence, complete silence. Grant looked like someone had kicked his chair out from underneath him. Mandy, Marianne said after a long pause, I need you to understand how serious this is. Atlas is threatening to terminate the entire contract. We stand to lose $3 million a year, and they've requested you specifically for a meeting tomorrow. I blinked. Why me? Because you're the only one who seems to understand their needs. Of course. Of course they wanted me now. I took a slow breath. I'm willing to help, but I won't walk back into the same situation. What do you mean? Marianne asked. This company has taken advantage of my loyalty, my time, my skills. I've sacrificed years of weekends, nights, and holidays. And what did I get? A laugh when I asked for a promotion. Grant flinched. I'm not angry, I continued. I'm done. Marianne leaned forward. Mandy, what do you want? There it was, a question I never thought they'd ask. For starters, I said, steady and calm, I want clear boundaries, clear responsibilities, real support, and recognition that matches the work I do. The room held its breath. And if that's not something this company is willing to provide? I looked at Grant, then back to the CEO. Then you'll need to find someone else to put out fires you didn't plan for. Marianne looked at me for a long time, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. We'll need to discuss this further, she said finally. But Mandy, don't make any decisions today. Translation, we can't afford to lose you. But for once in my life, I realized I could afford to lose them. I spent the rest of Monday in a strange limbo, half working, half watching the office unravel around me. People kept passing my desk with tentative smiles, as if approaching a recovering patient. Others avoided eye contact entirely, probably afraid I'd snap or walk out again. What they didn't understand was simple. I wasn't angry anymore. I was evaluating. By late afternoon, the emergency meeting's shockwaves had reached every corner of the building. The gossip traveled fast. Everyone suddenly realized just how much I'd been handling behind the scenes. Some looked guilty. Others just looked scared. And a few, honestly, looked relieved that someone had finally said it out loud. Around 4:30 p.m., Lila stopped by my desk with 2 cups of tea. You okay? She whispered. I think so, I said. It's been a day. That's one way of putting it. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. Rumor is corporate might shake things up. Big changes. I knew exactly what that meant. And Grant? I asked quietly. She made a face. Let's just say he's been pacing around the office like a man waiting for a firing squad. I didn't cheer at that. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. Just keep breathing, she said, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. They need you more than they realize. Maybe but needing someone and valuing them were 2 very different things. At 4:58 p.m., right as I was shutting down my computer, an email from CEO Marianne Ford popped up. Subject: Please see me before you leave today. Urgent. I hesitated. I didn't owe her my evening. Not anymore. But something told me this wasn't a conversation I could or should delay. I walked to her office, knocked once, and she waved me inside immediately. Mandy? She said, standing rather than sitting. Thank you for coming. Her posture was stiff, but not hostile. It reminded me of someone preparing for a conversation they should have had a long time ago. Close the door, please. I did. There was a long silence before she spoke. I reviewed everything you said in the meeting, and I spoke with legal, compliance, finance, and operations. She paused. They all said the same thing. I didn't respond. I wanted her to say it. You've been carrying responsibilities that should have been split between at least 3 departments. There it was. The truth. Finally. And, she added, rubbing her temples, it's clear Grant has been using you as a crutch instead of managing properly. My heart thudded once. I'm not here to get anyone fired. I know, she said. But this is bigger than Grant. This is about the structure of the department and your future here. She took a slow breath. I want to offer you a solution. My stomach tightened. Tomorrow morning, she continued, Atlas Dynamics wants a full restoration plan. They've specifically requested you be present. If we handle that meeting correctly, we can not only save the contract, we can also rebuild our relationship with them. And you want me to lead that meeting? No, Marianne said. I want you to lead the department. I blinked. Hard. What? We're creating a new role. Director of Operational Strategy. Full authority to restructure the processes, delegate responsibilities, and ensure no single point of failure ever happens again. I stared at her, unsure if I should laugh, cry, or walk out. She continued. It comes with a 30% salary increase and 2 additional hires of your choosing. You'd report directly to me. It was everything I had wanted. For years. Recognition, authority, support, a real path forward. But a part of me stayed cautious. And what about Grant? I asked. Her jaw tightened. He'll be reassigned, away from direct management. Translation. He's being demoted without the title change, I exhaled slowly. Marianne, you're offering a big change after one crisis. Are you sure this is about improvement and not panic? She met my eyes. Both can be true, but one thing is certain. We can't run this company without someone who actually understands how it works. That hit harder than I expected. I'd spent so long feeling invisible that hearing the truth spoken so plainly nearly felt unreal. I need to think about it, I said quietly. I expected you would. She nodded. Take tonight. But Mandy, if we lose Atlas, it won't be because of you. If we lose you, that's a different matter entirely. A hint of vulnerability slipped through her voice, something rare in someone like her. I thanked her, left her office, and walked toward the elevators, feeling a pressure I hadn't felt before. Not guilt, not obligation, power. For the first time, I wasn't trapped. I had options, choices, leverage. But that didn't mean I'd say yes, not yet. Because the one thing stronger than wanting recognition was wanting my life back. I walked out of the building at exactly 5 p.m., and as I stepped into the cool evening air, one thought echoed in my mind. Tomorrow, everything changes, but I still had to decide whether it would change for them or for me. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, something that hadn't happened in years. Not from anxiety, surprisingly, but from clarity. The world outside was still dark, that quiet pre-dawn blue, but I felt awake in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Today would determine the rest of my career, and for once I wasn't afraid of that. Chris brewed coffee while I got ready. He watched me quietly, the way people do when they sense someone is standing at a crossroads. Big day? He asked. I nodded. They want me to lead the Atlas meeting. And the new position? Still deciding. He came closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. Just promise me you'll choose what's right for you, not what's right for them. I smiled. I will. But even then, I wasn't sure which option that would be. When I arrived at the office, the tension was thick enough to taste. Everyone knew Atlas dynamics could make or break our quarter. Maybe even our year, people whispered as I walked by. A few nodded with cautious respect. It felt strange, not unwelcome, just unfamiliar. Grant stood outside the conference room, pale and stiff. The moment he saw me, he hurried over. "Mandy, thank God you're here. I want to say, I'm not doing this for you," I said gently. His mouth closed with an audible click. For once, he didn't argue. Inside, the Atlas team waited. 4 representatives, arms crossed, eyes sharp. They weren't hostile, but they were clearly done with excuses. Marianne gave me a small nod. "Let's begin." I took my seat across from Atlas. The room was silent. Then I started. I didn't defend the company, I didn't blame anyone. I didn't sugarcoat the failures. I simply told the truth. I explained where the breakdown happened, what processes were missing, and how the company had relied on one person to cover gaps that shouldn't exist. Atlas listened, their expressions slowly shifting from frustration to something closer to respect. Then I outlined a restructuring plan. Not a temporary fix, not a bandage, but a full system overhaul. Clear responsibilities, cross-training, new tracking tools, real accountability. And, I finished, I'll personally oversee the transition to ensure nothing falls through the cracks again. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Finally, the Atlas director leaned back in his chair. "Mandy," he said slowly, "this is the first honest explanation we've heard. You clearly know this company better than anyone." He exchanged a glance with his team, then nodded. "We're willing to continue the partnership, with the condition that you lead the restructuring." Marianne exhaled in relief. Grant looked like he might faint. I thanked them. They shook hands and the meeting ended. It was done. We had saved the contract. But now I had a different decision to make. After the Atlas team left, Marianne asked me into her office again. She closed the door behind us. "You made that look easy," she said. "It wasn't." "I know." She walked around her desk, lips pressed together. "Mandy, the position is yours if you want it. We need someone who sees the gaps and can fix them." I looked at her carefully. "Do you want systems fixed? Or do you want me to be the one holding everything together again?" She didn't flinch. "I want you to build a system where no one has to be you." That struck something inside me. Something I wasn't expecting. "I won't give you nights and weekends," I said. "I won't sacrifice my time with my family. I won't carry the weight of this company alone ever again." "You won't," she replied firmly. "You'll have a full team, real support, authority, and boundaries. And if things go wrong, then we solve them together. That's what leadership is supposed to be." For a moment, I just stood there, processing her words. 8 years. 8 years of being overlooked, dismissed, taken for granted. And now, here was the thing I had always wanted. Not the title, not the salary, not the recognition, but the chance to be valued without being exploited, the chance to build something better, the chance to actually live my life. I took a long breath. "Okay," I said. "I'll take the role." Relief swept across her face. "Good. I'm glad." I smiled, not triumphant, not smug, just steady. "But I'm doing this my way," I added. "There will be changes." "Good," she said again. "This company needs them." The restructuring wasn't easy. It took weeks of planning, new hires, hard conversations, and rebuilding trust. But slowly, methodically, things improved. Grant adjusted to his new role. He wasn't built for operations, and once that pressure was removed, he was surprisingly pleasant. Not close, but Civil Atlas stabilized. Other clients followed. My new team developed confidence, expertise, and independence. For the first time, I wasn't the only one who knew how things worked. But the biggest change wasn't at work. It was at home. I was home for dinner. I was present. I had energy again. I didn't dread Mondays. One evening, a few months later, Chris and I were sitting on the porch after dinner. He looked over at me and smiled. "You seem lighter," he said. "I feel lighter." He nodded. "I'm proud of you." I leaned back, watching the sunset melt into the horizon. "I finally learned something," I said quietly. "If you spend your life proving your worth to the wrong people, you'll forget your worth to yourself." He squeezed my hand. "And now?" "Now," I said, smiling softly, "they see what I always knew." And for the first time, I truly did.